For many of us, home represents safety. It's where we take our medication, call our children, lock the doors at night, and believe we are protected from the outside world. It's where routines become rituals and quiet neighborhoods become shields against chaos. But what happens when that sense of security is shattered in an instant? And if it can happen to an 84-year-old grandmother in a quiet neighborhood, could it happen to anyone? On February 1, 2026, that unsettling question became very real in Tucson, Arizona. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, vanished from the house where she should have been safest. At first, it looked like another troubling missing person case, the kind that briefly flashes across local news before fading into statistics. But as investigators peeled back the layers, what they uncovered suggested something far more deliberate and far more disturbing. This was not simply a disappearance. It was the collapse of certainty. The woman behind the headline. Before she became a case file, Nancy Guthrie was a presence, steady, warm, deeply rooted in her community. She had lived in her Tucson home for decades. The desert landscape outside her windows had changed slowly over the years. New developments creeping closer, younger families moving in, traffic increasing. But Nancy remained constant. She watered her plants in the early morning before the heat rose. She waved to neighbors walking their dogs. She called her daughter every evening at 7:30 p.m., without fail. Routine was not just preference. It was structure. At 84, structure meant stability. Nancy lived with serious heart disease. Years earlier, doctors had implanted a pacemaker to regulate her heartbeat. She followed a strict medication schedule. Small white tablets in the morning, a different capsule at noon, another at night. The pills were sorted weekly into a labeled plastic organizer that sat beside her kitchen sink. Those who loved her understood something critical. Her life depended on precision. A missed dose was not a minor oversight. It was risk. So when she vanished without her medication, without her phone, without her keys, those details were not incidental. They were alarms. February 1, 2026, 1:58 a.m. The Tucson night was quiet. Streetlights cast long yellow shadows across driveways. The air held that desert stillness. Not silence, but a hum of distant highway noise and the occasional bark of a dog. Most residents were asleep. At 1:58 a.m., a motion alert triggered on a Google Nest camera mounted near Nancy's front door. The footage, later recovered, shows a man dressed entirely in dark clothing. His face is hidden behind a ski mask. His posture is purposeful, not hesitant. In one hand, he appears to carry a firearm. He does not knock. He does not circle the property. He walks directly toward the front door. Then he reaches up toward the camera. Why? Why go immediately for the surveillance system unless you knew it existed? Was this random, or was Nancy's home specifically chosen? The camera that wasn't supposed to have footage. Initially, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, under Sheriff Chris Nanos, reported that no usable footage had been captured. Nancy's Nest subscription was inactive. The device had reportedly gone offline around the time of the intrusion. To many observers, that sounded like unfortunate timing. But investigators at the Federal Bureau of Investigation weren't satisfied with surface explanations. They requested back-end data directly from Google. Digital forensic specialists examined server-side logs, metadata fragments, partial uploads, digital traces that often remain even when users believe footage has vanished. Days later, the FBI announced something startling. They had recovered the video. The camera had recorded more than anyone realized. Somehow, despite being tampered with, the system had transmitted partial footage before going dark. The masked figure was visible. The approach. The movement toward the lens. And one small, crucial detail. On his pinky finger, beneath a glove that didn't fully conceal it, was a ring. A single distinguishing feature. In crimes where faces are hidden, tiny details become anchors. Height estimates. Walking gait. Hand dominance. Jewelry. That ring became one of the only unique identifiers investigators could release to the public. How many people wear rings on their pinky finger? Is it habit? Sentiment? Affiliation? Could someone recognize it? The morning after. Nancy was not reported missing at 2 a.m. The alarm came later. That afternoon, neighbors noticed something unusual. Nancy's curtains were still drawn. Her car remained in the driveway. She hadn't collected her newspaper. Phone calls went unanswered. Her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, grew uneasy. Nancy never missed their evening call. When repeated attempts to reach her failed, concern shifted to panic. Officers arrived at the home. Inside, they found no signs of packing. Her wallet sat on the kitchen counter. Her keys were in their usual bowl by the door. Her cell phone lay charging beside her bed. The medication organizer remained untouched. At 84 years old, Nancy never left home without those essentials. So how does someone vanish without the items she relied on every single day? Authorities reached an immediate, chilling conclusion. She did not leave voluntarily. Escalation. What began as a welfare check escalated rapidly. Crime scene technicians processed the home. Fingerprint dust coated door frames and countertops. Detectives canvassed the block. Neighbors reviewed their own security footage. The FBI joined the investigation within days. Hotlines were established. The security footage was released publicly. News outlets replayed the masked figure's approach repeatedly. Tucson residents watched and asked themselves, if that were my door, would I hear him? If my camera were disabled, would I know? If something happened at 2 a.m., would my neighbors notice? A daughter's plea. Savannah Guthrie stepped into the public eye not as a spokesperson, but as a daughter. She described her mother's medical condition in careful, urgent detail. Nancy required daily prescription medication to manage her heart condition. Without it, doctors warned, she faced the possibility of heart failure or sudden cardiac arrest. Her cardiologist spoke bluntly. Missing multiple doses could be fatal. Savannah addressed whoever might be responsible. She needs her medicine. Please, she said during one televised appeal. If you have any compassion at all, let her get medical care. For many watching, particularly those caring for aging parents, the fear felt personal. What would you do if your mother disappeared without life-sustaining medication? How long would hope outweigh reality? Inside the house, investigators found no evidence of cognitive decline. No signs Nancy had been confused or disoriented. Friends and neighbors described her as sharp, independent, mentally present. There was no packed bag, no handwritten note, no browser history suggesting travel plans. Everything pointed outward, not inward. And then they stepped onto the porch. The blood on the porch. Near the entryway, technicians found small droplets of blood. At first glance, they were subtle, darkened specks against the concrete. But forensic teams are trained to see what others overlook. Nearby, a flower pot lay disturbed. Petals scattered across the porch suggested a struggle. The blood samples were collected and sent for analysis. Days later, results confirmed what many feared. The blood belonged to Nancy. That confirmation transformed speculation into evidence. A forensic pathologist reviewed the droplet pattern. The conclusion: the blood was consistent with bleeding from the hands or face. Possibly defensive wounds. Possibly blunt force trauma. There was also indication the pattern might reflect coughing, raising the disturbing possibility of internal injury. At 84, even a brief physical assault could be catastrophic. The case was no longer a disappearance. It was an abduction involving violence. Community fear. As news spread, Tucson residents reacted with shock. Neighborhood associations organized emergency meetings. Sales of home security systems surged. Conversations shifted from weather and gardening to locks, cameras, and patrol schedules. Was Nancy targeted? Or was this a random predator testing vulnerability? The logistics raised questions. Abducting an elderly woman is not simple. It requires physical control, transportation, planning. Could one person have done this alone? Authorities confirmed a person of interest had been detained for questioning. No charges were immediately filed. Investigators remained cautious. Publicly, Sheriff Chris Nanos stated that multiple individuals had not been ruled out. The ring, the weapon, The camera tampering. The porch blood. Each element suggested forethought. The psychology of security. There is something uniquely unsettling about crimes that occur at home. Public spaces feel unpredictable. We accept risk there. But homes represent control. Locks. Alarms. Familiarity. Nancy did everything right. She had a security camera. She lived in a quiet neighborhood. She maintained daily contact with family. And yet, if someone intends harm and plans carefully, what stops them? Technology offers comfort, but is it prevention or merely documentation? If the FBI had not recovered that footage, would investigators even know someone approached her door? Days turn into weeks. Time is cruel in cases like this. Every day without medication increased the urgency. Every hour without answers amplified fear. Search teams combed desert outskirts. Volunteers distributed flyers. Tips continued pouring into the hotline. Most were dead ends. A man seen walking at night turned out to be a shift worker. A reported van sighting proved unrelated. The pinky ring remained the most distinctive clue. Investigators consulted jewelers. Could the ring indicate membership in a group? A fraternity? A cultural tradition? Was it custom-made? Mass-produced? What if someone recognized it, but hesitated to call? How many crimes go unsolved because someone doubts their own observation? The human toll. Behind every press conference stood a family suspended between hope and dread. Savannah described sleepless nights replaying scenarios. Was her mother conscious? Was she frightened? Did she know people were searching? Psychologists often describe ambiguous loss as one of the most painful experiences a family can endure. Without confirmation, grief cannot begin, yet hope cannot rest. Nancy's grandchildren recorded video messages pleading for her return. The public watched. Some donated to reward funds. Others debated theories online. But beneath speculation lay a simple truth. An elderly woman was gone. A broader question. The case forced difficult conversations. How prepared are we to protect elderly relatives living alone? Are medical alert systems enough? Do neighbors truly know one another anymore? Or do we exist side by side without connection? Nancy's disappearance pierced the illusion that quiet streets equal safety. It also exposed something else. The resilience of community. Strangers organized search grids. Local businesses offered resources. Volunteers stood in the desert heat scanning terrain. When safety fractures, solidarity often rises. Where the case stands. As of now, Nancy Guthrie has not been found. The recovered footage remains central evidence. The blood confirms violence. The person of interest remains under investigation. Authorities continue analyzing digital data, financial records, and phone pings. Investigators believe the act was deliberate. The masked man did not wander onto that porch by accident. He approached with intention. And somewhere, someone knows more. The unanswered questions. Who was the masked man with the pinky ring? Did he act alone? Was Nancy targeted, or was she chosen for vulnerability? Where is she now? And perhaps most haunting of all, if it can happen in a quiet Tucson neighborhood to an 84-year-old grandmother who did everything right, what does that mean for the rest of us? What happens when the place that once felt safest becomes the center of a mystery? And how does a single drop of blood transform hope into something far more urgent? For Nancy's family, this is not about headlines. It is about a mother, a grandmother, a woman whose life cannot be reduced to footage and forensic reports. For investigators, it is a puzzle demanding resolution. For the public, it is a warning and a call to awareness. Safety cannot be assumed. It must be strengthened, questioned, and protected. And until answers emerge, one question lingers in the Tucson desert air. Where is Nancy? They fanned out in a grid, boots whispering against sun-baked earth, radios crackling with clipped updates. It was the kind of search that becomes its own small war. Teams arranged like chess pieces across streets and scrubland, volunteers with headlamps combing ditch lines, a pair of bloodhounds working a scent line that bisected a quiet cul-de-sac. For days, the community's sense of ordinary time dissolved into the sharp, repetitive tasks of looking. Peering under hedges, scanning in arcs with polarized sunglasses, checking the rims of culverts and the tops of dry washes. About 2 miles from the house, where the landscape torched into low desert and the pavement rolled out toward a highway, someone found a glove. At first glance it was only a glove, black, textured, utilitarian, but in the mosaic of clues that comprised the case it looked like a hinge between mystery and identification. The glove matched the one in the surveillance footage. Same color, same knit pattern over the fingers, the slight fray at the cuff. That fray, in the hands of meticulous investigators, became a fingerprint of fabric. It was folded and placed into an evidence bag as if into a reliquary. Every ridge of it would be photographed, measured, swabbed, catalogued. Inside, there was DNA. That discovery rewrote the possibilities. DNA is at once intimate and mute. It tells you who, not necessarily why. The profile was uploaded into the Combined DNA Index System, the national database that holds profiles taken from convicted offenders, arrestees, and evidence from unsolved crimes. For all its power, Cody's is blunt. It is most useful when the unknown belongs to someone already in the system. When the lab called the lead detective, Detective Alvarez, the room hung on the slender hinge of a single word, no match. The result was heavy with potential meanings. It suggested the person had not previously been taken into custody and processed in any jurisdiction with mandatory DNA submission. It opened and closed doors at once. The suspect might be someone who had never tripped the criminal system censor, or it could be someone who had so far avoided anything that would put a sample into a national database. It did not mean innocence. It only meant the most direct route had failed. What happens when Cody's returns nothing? The answer is not resignation but redirection. They turned to investigative genetic genealogy, the laborious, meticulous art that had famously cracked cold cases decades old. It was a different kind of sleuthing. Instead of comparing a profile against a list of known offenders, genealogists look for family. They upload the unknown profile to consumer databases, places where ordinary people have uploaded their DNA to learn about ancestry or find distant cousins. From matches to second, third, or even fourth cousins, investigators build family trees outward, pruning and grafting branches until the possible identities narrow. It is painstaking work. It requires genealogical patience, public records trawls, phone books and obituaries and marriage certificates. It is, by design, both modern and antique, an algorithmic thread stretched across paper wills and county deed registries. It's also controversial, raising questions about privacy and the reach of law enforcement into family histories. But for families desperate for answers, the ethical debate is a background hum against the louder demand for a name. The glove's location mattered. 2 miles away from Nancy's house, it suggested an exit path, on foot, or tossed from a car window during a rapid transfer. Forensics mapped those 2 miles like a paleography of movement. Scrape marks on gravel, a tire track that ended at a wash, a cigarette butt, a shoe print on soft shoulder sand. Each tiny datum offered hypotheses. Did the suspect walk that route because it was familiar? Because it led to a pickup point? Or did they dump the glove as a calculated attempt to mislead? Closer to town, not far from the foothills that shadowed the suburban sprawl, another discovery appeared. A black 25-liter Ozark trail hiking pack, abandoned by a roadside in the Catalina foothills area. It bore the same bulk and silhouette of the bag seen on the masked figure in the footage. Small, retail objects like that can be both banal and forensic gold. Brand, model, point of sale, all potential threads. Investigators turned to the corporate world, to Walmart's loss prevention and video archives. A backpack like that could be purchased with cash or card, in a specific store, at a specific time. A credit card transaction could yield a name, video might yield a face. But retail footage is imperfect. Cameras can be obscured by sunlight, by hoods, by angles. Purchases made in cash drop off the digital trail. Sometimes, the buyer is deliberate about covering tracks. Other times, they are not. Inside the backpack, the press releases said, were items that investigators were not ready to make public. That withholding was strategic. When an investigation is active, public disclosure of details can invite false tips, staged confessions, or worse, the planting of evidence by those who would mislead. Keeping some facts private allows detectives to vet incoming claims. Only someone who knows particular, non-public details can be trusted to have been present. Together, the glove and the backpack suggested preparation. This was not a crime of opportunity in the prosaic sense. It looked rehearsed. When someone brings a glove, a mask, a bag with compartments, you begin to lean toward intention. Who buys those things? Who tests their fit? Are they ordinary outdoors people, or someone with practice in concealment? Yet as detectives followed those threads, procedural problems crept closer to home, literally. The house where Nancy had been last seen, the porch that had become a theater of violence, had become an issue in itself. Law enforcement had responded with a swiftness that comforted relatives. Sirens, the taping of yellow plastic, detective shoes leaving round, measured imprints on the porch. But then there were the lapses, the tape taken down and retied, sometimes to let officials back for administrative reasons. Intervals when the scene was not wholly sealed. Moments when members of the public, journalists, even an overzealous onlooker, crossed thresholds. Those were small acts in an emotional storm, but in a criminal investigation they are seismic. Every person who steps into a crime scene adds noise to the signal. A stray hair, a smear on a banister, a footprint that overlays another. Contamination can be invisible, but its echoes travel into evidence rooms and, eventually, into courtrooms. Forensic experts who watched the footage of the street and the porch were blunt in their assessments. "You can't unstepped on dust," one retired federal agent told a local reporter. "Once the scene is open, it's compromised in ways that can make a prosecutor's job harder." Another specialist raised their voice in interviews about chain of custody integrity, about how a single misfiled bag or a mislabeled swab can fray a case. That was the risk the investigators faced. They had strong leads, but they also had practical flaws to mitigate. They installed a forensic tent over the entrance to protect the threshold from weather and inadvertent visitors. They probed further. A septic tank behind the property was inspected, a step taken in cases where suspects might discard incriminating items in the messy, subterranean places people sometimes use to hide what they fear will incriminate them. The public was not told whether anything was recovered. The silence was purposeful. The decision to return the house to the family after initial processing was another fraught choice. For the family it was bittersweet. Practical needs, a bed to sleep in, a kettle to heat water, photographs to maintain, collided with the visceral dread of returning to the last ordinary place Nancy had inhabited. The house, which had once folded itself into the small domestic rituals of meals and remotes and late-night laughter, had become evidence and memory stacked together. Some forensic experts argued the property should have remained sealed until arrest. Others acknowledged that investigative priorities sometimes balance the needs of the living with the integrity of a scene. Nancy's family had to live with that imperfect calculus. They walked through rooms that smelled of lemon cleaner and old books, traced the route she might have taken from kitchen to porch, touched surfaces that the public had touched before them. How do you reconcile the need for normalcy with the knowledge that ordinary touches might complicate forensic clarity? How do you reclaim a home that is also an archive of a night you cannot retrieve? Time slipped by. Weeks became a pattern of interviews and canvases. Detectives with notebooks, photos spread out on tables, maps with pins. Detectives revisited the same questions, refining the language as they went. Had Nancy been expecting anyone? Was the porch light on that night? Had she had visitors in recent days who might have been upset? The family answered as best they could, offering names and routines, small domestic details that can sometimes supply context for motive. Were there disputes? Health crises? Worries? In cases involving older adults, investigators always consider vulnerability. Was Nancy easily coerced by promises of assistance? Did anyone exploit a medical dependence? Could a caregiver relationship have turned sinister? In interviews, friends described Nancy with an intimacy raw enough to ache. She was given to routines, a morning cup of tea, a particular chair with the best light, a small garden of potted succulents at the window. She had lived in the neighborhood for decades. Neighbors remembered her holiday lights and her habit of feeding a stray cat. She looked for the mundane comforts that frame a life, a crossword, a phone call from a friend, and in that particular ordinariness lay the heartbreak. When crime intrudes on someone's routine, it feels especially violating, because it takes the ordinary and rips it into evidence. Community response was a study in tension. On one hand, there was solidarity. Neighbors organized search parties, left flyers in mailboxes, and delivered casseroles to the family's kitchen. On the other, the neighborhood convulsed with suspicion. Old alliances frayed under the weight of doubt. Casual greetings on sidewalks became taut, as people wondered whether someone they had waved to each morning could be capable of concealment. Rumors slid along social media. Some were helpful, pointing to strange cars seen late at night. Others were poisonous, speculating about motives without facts. In the echo chamber of online tips, detectives had to sift earnest leads from fantasy, which in itself consumes resources. Media coverage amplified everything. Photographers set up over long lenses at the edge of the taped-off property. Reporters asked families the same questions over and over, searching for a narrative that could be told on a nightly broadcast. The intrusive gaze of cameras, which can both spotlight an injustice and exploit grief, complicated matters. The family pleaded for privacy while accepting that publicity might help. It's a bitter calculus. Would the broader the net of attention increase the chance that a witness would step forward? Or would it simply create noise? Back in the lab, the glove's DNA had produced a profile, and the backpack's contents were still being processed. Forensic technicians ran tests. Mitochondrial DNA to see maternal lineage, YSTR analysis to see paternal line hints, touch DNA swabs from the straps and zippers. Each analysis had a time cost. Each result could produce new leads or dead ends. When you are working with partial or mixed DNA, the interpretative work is as much art as science. How many contributors can be distinguished on a single swab? Are the signals strong enough to produce a usable profile? Investigative genetic genealogy also delivered its own timeline. Matches in public databases were measured as percentages of shared DNA. A 2 to 3% match might suggest a second cousin once removed, someone with as many as a few hundred shared ancestors years back. With patience, genealogists build trees from those matches, reaching into public records, birth certificates, census entries, old newspapers. They called distant relatives to narrow the search. We've found a match that suggests you might be related to someone whose DNA was recovered in a crime. Can you help us fill in the family tree? It is sensitive work. Families who thought themselves disconnected sometimes found themselves thrust into a forensic process that laid bare private relationships.